Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So in November of 2015, we had a pretty serious problem at my school. And I was the head of intermediate and middle school at a Jewish day school, so I'm in charge of 4th through 8th grade. And like I said, we had a pretty serious problem. So what was it? Well, our problem is that we discovered that we had fragile kids. Our kids were fragile. And we were noticing this especially in 4th and 5th grade. And so when you think about the definition of fragile, when it comes to a fragile person, it said, the dictionary says not strong or sturdy, delicate and vulnerable. And so when we recognized that our kids were fragile, that they weren't resilient, we wanted to turn them from fragile kids into resilient kids. So I just want to let you know that we did. We were very successful in making this happen. And then we've sustained this change for almost 10 years at the school. We spent $0 on this change. And we watched this problem of fragile kids or pedestal kids, lack of resiliency kids, learned helplessness kids. We saw that problem almost disappear at our school. And one day I heard a 4th grader say, wow, now I don't have to keep acting smart. So if you're curious about how you can make this transformation take place at your school, stick around because we're going to dive into this together. And not only that, everything I'm going to talk to you about today, there's free access to all of this, everything that we used at our school. So Google slideshows, videos, handouts, diagrams, pictures, everything for free in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 161. Because on today's episode of The Private School Leader, I'm going to teach you how to turn fragile kids into resilient kids. So before we do that, just quickly, I want to let you know that I just appreciate you so much and you taking time to listen to the podcast today. And I want to say thank you by giving you a free gift. And it's called 7 Strategies to Effectively Deal with Difficult Teachers. So I want you to stop and think, when I say difficult teacher, does someone pop into your head? Okay, well, sometimes we need some courage and some confidence to deal with these difficult teachers, but I think what you really need is a plan. And so I've got a step-by-step plan that can help you take one of your difficult teachers and improve their performance and improve their attitude. So if you go to theprivateschoolleader.com/difficult, you can grab for free 7 strategies to effectively deal with difficult teachers. That's at theprivateschoolleader.com/difficult. And if you're listening in real time, we're in mid to late November, and I know how busy you are. And, you know, I just always felt like the PD day that was, sometimes we do one right around Thanksgiving, sometimes we do one right at when the teachers return from winter break to give them kind of a soft reentry. And I always found that PD day kind of snuck up on me and I didn't prepare for it as well as I had hoped. And it was also very difficult to find meaningful PD for all of the teachers in pre-K through 12 if I wanted them in the same room at the same time. And so I just want to give you a quote from a teacher in North Carolina who did the plug-and-play PD for Parent Academy. And this teacher said, I never thought a PD could be relevant to all 3 divisions in our school. We all have the same issues with parents, whether we teach the 3-year-old or the 12th grader. Private schools are different, end quote. So I've got you covered when it comes to your next PD day with your teachers because Parent Academy has 2 plug-and-play PDs. These are 45-minute webinars, so picture your teachers all in one room. This webinar is playing on the screen. They have their guided notes in front of them with discussion questions. They go through, they're filling in their guided notes. Afterwards, you facilitate some discussion questions. It has been a game changer for over 24 private schools, and I want it to be a game changer for your school. So there's still time for you to make this a part of your next PD day. Go to theprivateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy to see how you can, first of all, have the first 4 modules of Parent Academy help you to be less stressed when you deal with parents. And then the 2 plug-and-play PDs, you have lifetime access to that. So privateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. So we're talking about fragile kids today. And maybe you're not sure if the kids at your school are fragile. Are they resilient? Do they have learned helplessness? And so I want to ask you a couple of questions maybe to help clarify that. So do some of your students give up easily when faced with a challenging problem or concept? Do you have students that are sometimes too worried about looking smart? Do you have any students who get extremely upset when they make a mistake on an assignment? Or do you have students who get really upset when they get a question wrong on a test? Do you have students who are dealing with a lot of performance anxiety? And do you have students that when they are faced with something that they've never seen before, maybe a math problem, that they just shut down and they refuse to do it? Do you have students that it just feels like, man, why is it that I feel like they're wrapped in bubble wrap? Sometimes the parents in our private schools, it's like they want to be snowplow parents and they want to clear the path of all obstacles for their child. And we know that that's not building resilience. Some of these children at our schools have been told their whole lives, you are so smart, by their parents. And then their parents put them on a pedestal. And then what I've found is that these kids cruise through lower school on their natural intelligence. But then when they come up against something, and we saw it in 4th and 5th grade at my school, boom, they shut down, they cry, they slide the piece of paper back across the desk to the teacher. They say, I can't do this. And so what I'm calling fragile is really a lack of resilience. And so if you want your students to be more resilient, this episode is for you. And speaking of episodes, the most downloaded episode in the history of the podcast, this is episode 161. Way back in episode 4, Turn Pedestal Kids into Gritty Kids by Implementing Growth Mindset, is the most downloaded episode in the podcast history. And so there are people all over the world who are using these resources that I talked about. I said that everything that I am going to teach you, I'm going to give it to you for free at the show notes, privateschoolleader.com/episode 161. If you decide you can use it for free at your school. And there's this other part that I want to mention is that, okay, you're listening to this episode and you're thinking, man, I really wish that I could teach my teachers this so that then they could buy in, get excited about it, and then teach the kids. Well, I've got you covered there too, because when you go to the show notes, there's a 45-minute free video webinar that I created that you could show at a PD day with your teachers. There's guided notes that go with it. And then there's access to all the mini lessons. Like I said, the Google slideshows, the Google Docs, the handouts, the videos, all of it there for free. First of all, it's not my intellectual property. We're going to talk about Carol Dweck and growth mindset and her research in a minute. So the reason it's all free, it's not my intellectual property, number one. Number two is because I just want kids all over the world to learn about growth mindset. I was looking back to when I started the podcast, and I have a document here, and I wrote down my just cause or my why for starting the podcast, starting this business. And here it is. Kids around the world deserve to grow up learning about growth mindset in schools led by servant leaders. That's my just cause for what I do. Kids around the world deserve to grow up learning about growth mindset in schools led by servant leaders. So I want your school to have a plan, to not just talk about growth mindset, to not just be frustrated about fragile kids or pedestal kids or learned helplessness or lack of resilience, you can do something about it. So again, as I just jump into this, and I'm going to do kind of a flyby, we're going to buzz the airport. We're just not going to go deep on any of this, but I'm just going to give you a taste, and then all of those resources are there for you in the show notes. But you're probably familiar with growth mindset versus fixed mindset, and about 35 years ago, Stanford University psychologist Dr. Carol Dweck and her colleagues, they started to research attitudes about failure. And her findings led to more research, and it showed that a student's underlying beliefs or mindset about learning and intelligence significantly impacted their motivation and achievement. And so I just think that this is the crux of the whole thing. This is huge. The way a child believes that learning takes place impacts how they learn, how hard they try, and for how long they try. So let me give that to you again. What a child believes, how a child believes that learning takes place impacts how they learn, how hard they try, and for how long they try. And so in her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, Carol Dweck says, quote, "No matter what your ability is, effort is what ignites the ability and turns it into accomplishment," end quotes. Effort ignites ability. Isn't that what we want our kids to do? And so she coined the terms growth mindset and fixed mindset to provide a framework for her research so that we could understand it. And so when we're talking about a growth mindset, we're talking about someone that tends to embrace challenges, persist in the face of obstacles. They see effort as the path to mastery. So these are the kids in your math classes that are going to just give it a go. They're going to try a problem, and they're not obsessed over getting it right, quote unquote. And I'll just pause there. We've got kids in our school that are obsessed about getting it right. And if they don't, they want to shut it down. And students with a growth mindset recognize that mistakes are opportunities and they don't define us. How do the students in your school handle making mistakes? How do they handle failure? How do they handle setbacks? The answer to that question shines a light on how resilient the students are in our schools. And of course, there's a range. We have students with a growth mindset and a fixed mindset in any school. But what I've seen over the years is that private schools, we tend to have more kids with a fixed mindset. And I don't refer to them as this. Carol Dweck refers to them as pedestal kids, and I'll talk about that just in a second. But students with a fixed mindset, they believe that their talent and ability and intelligence are a fixed trait that they received when they were born. Either you're a math person or you're not. Either you're good at sports or you're not. Either you can play the piano or you can't. It's something that you inherited from your parents and you were born with it or you weren't born with it, and that's a fixed mindset. And they believe, people with a fixed mindset believe that success is possible with talent alone. And that's why these kids want to look smart, quote unquote. So usually because they want to look smart, they avoid challenge. They give up easily in the face of obstacles. They don't have a lot of stamina when it comes to problem solving, and they see effort as a waste of time. And they're the ones that say, I'm not good at math, or I'm not a math person. But that kind of thinking, the fixed mindset, it gives them a built-in excuse to put forth less effort. When we complain, when we make excuses in life, in any area of life, we put in less effort. And so these fragile kids that I'm talking about, some writers refer to them as students with a fixed, some writers refer to students with a fixed mindset as pedestal kids. And so the idea is that picture a kid up on a pedestal. Who put that kid there? Well, the parent put the kid there by saying, you're so smart for their whole life. But sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes as teachers, if we're praising talent and intelligence and ability, and we're not making sure that we praise effort and strategy and stamina and persistence and trying again, then we're actually contributing to putting those kids up on the pedestal and keeping them there. They're on the pedestal because they are so smart, quote unquote. You are so smart. But here's the problem. They cruise through lower school. In my experience, and the research supports this, they cruise through lower school. But then they hit something that they haven't seen before, that they don't know, usually when it involves critical thinking and problem solving and not just rote memorization and low-level reading comprehension, and they just shut down. Because if they don't try, they're never exposed, and they will do anything to not get knocked off the pedestal. They don't want to be sold out as not smart, and they get to stay on the pedestal. And so think about it for a minute. Can you picture a pedestal kid at your school? Can you picture 5? Can you picture 12? That kid who's been told, you're so smart, but they're hitting some stuff. It's 4th, it's 5th, it's 6th grade, maybe it's 3rd grade, and they're kind of shutting down. And it's like, whoa, this kid's really smart. Why aren't they doing the thing? They're not doing the thing because they don't want to get sold out and knocked off the pedestal. So what is our responsibility as educators and as educational leaders? I feel strongly that we have a responsibility to help our students develop a growth mindset. Because it's not just about school. This, in my opinion, the child learning a growth mindset, building their resilience is, in my opinion, the most impactful thing that they can learn in school. Because if they adopt a growth mindset, they're going to be more successful in life, but they're also going to feel more emotionally safe at school. And I just think they're going to have a better life. And I've seen it with my own eyes. I told you before, I've heard a 9-year-old say, now I don't have to keep acting smart, after they did a couple of the mini lessons that are available to you for free in the show notes. It just reframes how they think about how they learn. It's not about how smart you are. It's about how hard you try, how long you stay with something, switch up the strategy, put in that effort, and then you get to the solution. That is how you learn. That is how you grow. And what about your kids at your school that have anxiety, performance anxiety, about freaking out about when the tests come back or when report cards are coming out? Kids in your school or in my school that tie their self-worth to their report card. I think we've got some kids like that in our schools. And maybe your school is doing a great job of teaching growth mindset. And if so, awesome. I'm so happy because I'm on a mission to make sure. I just told you what my just cause in creating this podcast that's been downloaded in 68 countries. I want people all over the world, these kids, they deserve to grow up in schools, learning about growth mindset, schools that are led by servant leaders. And so I'm going to just continue to preach about growth mindset. But it's one thing to know, okay, yeah, we should do this, but it's another thing to be like, well, how are we going to do this? You need a plan. Okay, well, I'll give you a plan. So real quick, what we're going to do is talk about number 1, scope, number 2, environment, number 3, language, number 4, teaching brain plasticity, and then number 5, the mini lessons. And then we'll wrap it up, and I'll just redirect you to all of those free resources. So the first thing is scope. So in your school, I get it. You might not want to start something, especially mid-year, although I think that this is something that could start in A grade or maybe in 4th and 5th grade in your school at any time during the year. But the larger the scope, the easier it will be to implement growth mindset with your students. But one teacher could do this with one class. But I've found it to be so much more effective when there are posters in the hallway, when every teacher, as the kid goes up and down the hallway, is using the same language. And we'll talk about language in a minute. And so what we did was we started in year 1 with 4th and 5th grade. And it worked really well. And so then the year after that, we intentionally added it in middle school. And then the year after that, we intentionally added it in lower school. And the mini lessons that are available in the show notes, privateschoolleader.com/episode 161. There are lessons that are broken into mini lessons that are for 4th through 12th graders. And then there's also mini lessons that are for preschool through 3rd graders. So everything is there for you. But the larger the scope, the more effective it is. And that's where you come in as the leader. Are you going to decide to intentionally implement growth mindset in your school? I'm not saying that it has to go school-wide, but maybe you decide, you know what? I think that our 4th and 5th graders need this, or our 5th and 6th graders, or maybe just your 3rd graders, or maybe just your 6th graders, and you want to pilot it in one of those grades. Okay. If you do it and do it well, I'm telling you, it is going to change the lives of those kids. And then you're going to want to do it other places next year. I want you to remember one last thing before we go on from scope. You are the person in charge of creating and maintaining the culture in your school or your division if you're a division head. You are the thermostat. You are not the thermometer. You set the culture. You set the temperature. Thermometers just report the culture and report the temperature. You are a thermostat. You get to decide what happens in your school, what happens in your division when it comes to growth mindset. All right, number 2 is environment. So what do I mean by environment? Your teachers need to intentionally create an emotionally safe space for your kids where they know it's okay to fail. And there are some unkind kids out there. And so what this means is absolute zero tolerance for snide remarks or snickering or sighs or eye rolls from the kids who understand a concept the first time when the kid who doesn't understand it is asking a question. So we've got to create a safe space where that kid who doesn't understand, they're never going to raise their hand because they don't want that reaction. And it doesn't even have to be a verbal reaction. The eye rolls, the crossing of arms, you know what I'm talking about. And so another place, an example of a safe space is, what if it's the spring musical and it's auditions? We didn't tolerate letting the other kids who were sitting there while someone was auditioning, if it's a 6th grade boy and his voice cracks when he's singing a song, we're not going to tolerate the other kids rolling around on the floor laughing at this kid. That's not a emotionally safe space. That's not psychologically safe. So our environment has to be emotionally safe, psychologically safe. Here's the thing. You're probably doing a good job with that in the first place. In that environment, growth mindset can grow. But it has to grow in a safe space, because if not, then the kids aren't going to take those risks. They're not going to try the thing and give it a go because they don't want that reaction from their classmates. And another powerful way to create a growth mindset environment is with posters. I'm a big believer in the visual, and this is a low cost or free way to reinforce this important message. And what we did, there's a couple of images in the show notes document, but honestly, you can just Google growth mindset poster Star Wars, growth mindset poster Taylor Swift, growth mindset poster LeBron James. And then it's going to give you all these images with quotes from that person that are growth mindset quotes. And then you print them off on the copy machine and then you hang them in your classroom. The first year, we didn't do anything that caused us to have anything to be printed other than on our copy machine. The largest was whatever the biggest long and skinny thing is. I think it's 11 by 17. That was the biggest poster that we had, and some of them were laminated, some weren't. The point is that if we proliferate the environment with that messaging, imagine that as part of one of the mini lessons, you ask each kid, well, pick your favorite athlete or person in history or famous performer or movie star or whoever, and get a growth mindset quote with that person's picture, and then we're going to print them out, and it's going to be like a little 5x7 thing that they keep on the corner of their desk. And each kid could be different, and it's their favorite person, their favorite character. It's Harry Potter, or it's, a famous athlete. The environment that you create is really important. And then I think the most important piece is the language. Okay, so what you say and how often you say it will have by far the largest impact on whether or not your students shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And we want our teachers to become experts in saying the right thing. We want our teachers to become experts in saying the right thing. So one is praise. One of the things that worked really well, I told our teachers in 4th through 8th grade, you are never to praise a student for intelligence or ability. That's a no-no. But you can heap praise on them for displaying effort and stamina and resilience and creative strategies and for just giving it a go. And we just heap praise on those kids and don't say, oh, you're so smart. And then the kids who are of higher intelligence, they're like, whoa, why is that kid getting all the praise? And then it's like a rising tide that lifts all the boats, because then the high performers, as far as intelligence, IQ, they're working harder. And let's face it, a lot of them are kind of coasting through school. And so at the school, when I was there, we didn't have teachers saying, you're so smart. I would say all the time, I don't care if you're smart. I care if you know how to work hard. And so it might take your teachers some time to transition into this, I'll call it process praise mentality, but it is so powerful. Process praise mentality for your teachers. So you kind of have to get your teachers bought in. That's why they could, watch the webinar and do the guided notes, because I spell all this out for them in that webinar. But another powerful thing with the language is the power of the word yet, and putting yet at the end of a sentence. So I'm not good at math, period. Or I'm not good at math yet. I have no idea what I'm doing on the basketball court yet. So do we require our students to use precise math vocabulary? Of course we do. So we could require our teachers, and then we get our students to use precise language and start putting the word yet at the end of a sentence that they would use to describe themselves negatively. The word yet needs to be a very, very common word in our schools. And it immediately shifts the focus from what is fixed, what they're saying I can't do, I'm not good at, I'm not a math person, to what is possible by just adding yet. Let me say that again. The word yet at the end of a sentence shifts the focus from what's fixed to what's possible. So when they say I'm not good at this, and the teacher says yet, it won't take long before that student is saying yet. And your teachers can model this strategy as well. A few other things with the language. Other quotes that we would hear a lot at my school: failure is not a permanent condition. You actually get smarter by failing and then trying again with a different strategy and more effort. I heard that a lot. You may be struggling, but you're making progress. I see your growth over here in these places. We would emphasize the phrase productive struggle, especially when we are communicating with parents. And then the last thing is that we would celebrate mistakes. And it might sound a little bit corny, but we would make a really big deal about a mistake, and we'd be like, Samantha, that was the best mistake I've seen all day. And so when you take away the shame and judgment of a mistake and you celebrate it, you take away that anxiety, and the kids that are paralyzed by even thinking about making mistakes, now they're just like, okay, I'll give it a try. Maybe I'll be celebrated for making the best mistake of the day. So we've talked about scope, environment, language, and then I just want to talk a minute about brain plasticity. You didn't always know how to ride a bike. And at some point, you tried to learn how, and it was very wobbly, and you fell, and it took a long time, and you tried and you tried and you tried. Maybe you started with training wheels, maybe you didn't. Maybe you had someone holding on to the back of it. For some, it took longer. For some, it didn't take as long. But then all of a sudden, everything clicked with the balance and the hand-eye coordination and the feet and everything. And then, boom, there you go, off down the street. And then they say it's just like riding a bike, which we all know means that something you haven't done for a really long time, well, it's just like riding a bike. You get back on it, you do it. You know why? It's because when you were trying to learn how to ride a bike, you were creating a new neuro pathway for how to ride a bike. And so that's what happens with everything when we learn. You didn't know how to do algebra until you learned algebra, and then you created a new neural pathway that is how to do algebra. And so some people think, oh, well, like 9 and 10-year-olds, they're probably too young to learn about neuroplasticity. Wrong. We taught our 9 and 10-year-olds. We even taught lower school students. There's some videos in the resources embedded in the lessons that I've been talking about where we teach them, and it is so intuitive that these kids understand brain plasticity, and it's so key in them changing their perception about their own abilities, and that, oh, okay, well, I'll just keep trying and keep learning it, and then I'll make a new neural pathway, and then I'll know how to do it. There's a path. All right, the final part of this, then, are the resources. Now, I just want to give a disclaimer here, or try to convince you of something, I should say, because our teachers are struggling to get with insufficient time to just even get their curriculum in. And then you're thinking about these mini lessons, and it's like, oh man, when am I going to fit that in? They're 15 minutes once a week for 5 weeks. That's a total of 75 minutes in a whole school year. If you did the math on how many hours you're in school, 75 minutes is going to be a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent. But 15 minutes once a week for 5 weeks, have the posters, have the reinforcing language, have the safe space environment, and it will change those kids. It will change your school. And so lesson 1, introduction to, this is for 4th through 12th grade, lesson 1, introduction to growth mindset, lesson 2, neuroplasticity, lesson 3, self-talk, lesson 4, persistence, resilience, and grit, and lesson 5, review and application. Everything is there for you. It's organized. It's plug and play. privateschoolleader.com/episode 161. You click on it. It's going to take you to a PDF. In the PDF is going to be another link to click on that takes you to the YouTube video. That's the 45-minute webinar. I want to give all of this to you. Number 1, I said it's my just cause. Number 2, it's not my intellectual property, but I do have one ask. And that is, when you do this, if you do this, that once it starts to take hold at your school, I would just love for you to email me with a little bit of a story. Well, this is what's happening at our school, or this kid who was all tied up in knots, now they're not, and they just try the thing. They just do the thing. Growth mindset stories make me really, really happy. And I want that for you and your school and your kids. So I just ask that you send me an email, mark.o.minkus@gmail.com, and maybe you're listening to this and you've been listening from the beginning all the way back at episode 4, and back then 3 years ago you implemented this in your school. Well, I'd love to hear from you too with a growth mindset story from something that happened in the last 3 years. But this is essential. It's life-changing, and I believe strongly it's our responsibility. So the big takeaways: growth mindset versus fixed mindset. We're gonna look at scope and environment and the language, and we're going to teach brain plasticity. We're going to use these mini lessons. And it's all there for you. The call to action, you probably already know where I'm going. Go to the show notes, privateschoolleader.com/episode 161, and just check it out. Look at the resources. Click on the mini lessons. Watch that webinar video. Imagine that playing on a screen with your teacher sitting there with the printed out PDF in front of them, taking the guided notes. This is something that can change the lives of the students in your school. And I've seen it with my own eyes, and I just want that for your school and for your kids. So to wrap it up, just a quick reminder, 7 strategies to effectively deal with difficult teachers. You can grab that at the privateschoolleader.com/difficult. And if the parents are relentless at your school and they're living rent-free in your head, remember that the first 4 modules of Parent Academy are for you, but you've got a PD day coming up, and those plug-and-play PDs can be for your teachers. So go to theprivateschoolleader.com/parentacademy to check that out. And I just would love it if you would share this episode with another leader in your life or a rising leader at your school. And I just appreciate you. And, I hope that you got value from this episode. More importantly, I think that it can change the lives of the students in your school. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I appreciate you and all the hard work you do at your school for those lucky kids and those lucky teachers. Thank you for taking some of your precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.